All right, this is Openstax U.S. History, Chapter 9, Section 3, on the move, the Transportation Revolution. So transportation, or the Transportation Revolution, is the change in how goods and people move around, get around. This is thanks to two new technologies. So there's technological advancements that's responsible for that. Both the railroad and steamships utilize the steam engine, which makes transportation much easier, especially transporting goods, and cheaper. But you also have this kind of cultural, social, and political, this idea of the march of progress. And that is, to create better transportation networks is something that ought to be pursued. And so this was used by, politics, society, and culture. And this was really to promote some of these new ways of transporting people and goods around. So there was a technological aspect to it where things just became easier and cheaper. But there really was a push politically, there was a push in American culture and society that these things were good. It was good to transform the wilderness into civilization. That's probably a good way of describing this march of progress. So this is, taking the wilderness and creating civilization. Right, and that was a good thing. That was a good thing. So one of the first things that that you began to see improvements or changes in transportation was with roads and canals. A canal, if you're not familiar, is a man-made river, right? A road is pretty self-explanatory. People had gotten around previously before railroads, either on horseback or simply by walking. But now you had more investments and more creation of these roads. So the Cumberland Road is a good example. This is a national highway. So this was a federal project, which was rare. And it connected Maryland to Illinois. And it simply just made things easier to transport, via horseback, which is typically, or horse-drawn carriage, which is typically how people did things. But again, this was done on a federal level by the national government. That was much more rare. What was much more common were turnpikes, and a turnpike is essentially a road. This was mostly done by private business. So they might ask you to pay something like a toll, for example. And these were much more on the state level. And that's how most road construction was done, right? So most was on the state level. Federal projects were very rare to have happened. And I think of all the states, New York was probably the leading in terms of getting a lot of these transportation networks done. However, more efficiently were canals. And canals, like we said before, they're man-made rivers. And one of the reasons as to why canals became even more sought after was because of the steamship, right? So let's go back up here. Maybe we'll draw it in blue because canals are rivers or waterways, right? So steamships, which made it a lot easier to transport goods, led to the construction of canals. And the Erie Canal of New York, so the Erie Canal was built in New York, was the most successful. Really set a precedent for canal construction in the United States. It connected the Hudson River, which is in New York, to the Great Lakes, which is located in the Midwest. Here you have some pictures of canals. This is the Erie Canal up here, actually. Right, very romanticized view of it. This is the Wabash Canal, or the Wabash-Erie Canal. It went all throughout Indiana, so you could very easily transport goods all throughout the state of Indiana thanks to canals and man-made rivers. This sort of excitement, or the desire for the march of progress, these investments, that's probably a good way, were sometimes referred to as the American system. The American system is an umbrella term And what we mean by that, an umbrella term, is that it can apply to a lot of different things: road construction, canal construction, any type of internal or domestic improvement is described as the American system, right? So the desire by politicians to build more canals, to invest in the country, we would say that all of these things fall under the American system. The biggest cheerleader of the American system is Henry Clay, right? He is the biggest cheerleader for it to a certain extent. The president, John Quincy Adams, who was the 6th president of the United States, to a lesser degree. Now, more so than roads, more so than canals, the most effective form of transportation was railroads, right? Most effective. It was the fastest, it was the cheapest, it could cover the most amount of ground. The Mohawk and Hudson Railroad Company was the first to sell railroad or train. If you're not familiar with the term railroad, it means train. We'll just say tickets. I don't actually know if they actually sold tickets, but they were the first one to open. And pretty soon you had railroads that were being constructed and built all throughout the country, even replacing something like the Erie Canal. This ultimately led to Americans being on the move far more. Travel times were made a lot shorter. So, for example, the time that it took 4 days before the Transportation Revolution, and now only took half a day. And this was not just important for things like people being on the move, but especially for commerce. It was simply just a lot cheaper to transport goods. And the country became much more connected, right? More connected. So, for example, you had various farms, right? And farms grew their crops and whatever it was. And then you had cities where the giant factories were. And now, thanks to things like the railroad, right? It's a train, very bad train, but nonetheless a train. There we go. Those farm families, those people who were isolated in the rural area, now became connected to the people in the cities. And essentially what you had was food go from the farm to the cities, and goods go from the factories into the agricultural rural area. So much more connection going on, and not just the exchange of things like goods, but also the exchange of ideas, the exchange of culture, right? The exchange of what we might call nationalism. That's this sort of sense of nation, so to speak. And we refer to the rise of this thing and the intricate way. And this was in stark contrast to the way that the American economy was before. Before it was exporting things to Europe and importing things overseas. Now you have an internal American economy, and we call this the market revolution. Right, the market revolution.